Well, hello and welcome to the New Book of Daniel podcast. My name is Daniel Bobitsky. I'll be your host on this adventure. We are talking about some issues in the news from a Patriot perspective, things you're probably not going to see on your late night talk show hosts, talk show people. It's not going to hear it on the evening news. You're not going to hear it on the radio, but you're going to hear it from me because that's what I talk about is stuff that's in the news from a Patriot perspective. In tonight's discussion, I'm going to be talking about the what the RNC, the Republican National Committee, does not want people to know. I'm specifically talking about the establishment Republicans. I'll be talking about Bill Gates is in the news again, and something that he wants everybody to buy. Catch there. There's a mixture of some good news and some bad news coming out of Afghanistan. Brief little story that I will touch on. And then, of course, we just had the situation where Trump was acquitted in the Senate. And one of the people who voted to charge him, find him guilty, was Louisiana's Senator Bill Cassidy. Mr. Bill Cassidy is getting called on to resign now by Louisiana Republicans. And then also a kind of a follow-up. There's been some effort to institute socialism in some of our major West Coast cities. We'll talk about how and why and what's happening to our citizens over there. All right, let's jump right in and talk about what the RNC does not want you to know. And I'm going to be referring heavily here on an article that Wendy Strock Mahoney at Uncover DC wrote. That's the title of her piece, What the RNC Doesn't Want You to Know. Wendy is parlaying a podcast that Tracy Beans did with her co-host Frank over at the Frank and Beans, the Dark to Light podcast. And they had a guest on there, and his name was Dan Schultz. And Dan's got a book out where he talks about how conservatives, how patriots can take back the Republican Party. This has been an issue that Alan Keyes and I have talked about. I'm on his show every Monday at noon Mountain, 2 o'clock Eastern. And for the past several weeks, we've been talking about what is to become of the Republican Party, because it's kind of divided right now. And Dan Schultz has an interesting project he calls the Precinct Project. There's some down-home news that's tied to this. Now, so what he's talking about, really, is that every state is broken up into voting precincts. So when you get into a vote, when you go to your voting location, your poll, there's a precinct number. And so, when I go into mine, it's precinct 15 blank, and then there's the other side of the building is 15 something else. But I'm in precinct 15 in the state where I live. Every precinct then is divided up. Every district, is divided up into separate precincts. And every precinct has what's known as a committeeman. A precinct committeeman. P9R says hello. Hi. I'm forgetting who you are, but hi. Thanks for joining us on the podcast tonight. We are looking at about half of the precinct committeemen in this country. Half the seats are not filled. So what is a precinct committeeman? These are people who represent the precinct. It's basically the lowest form on the totem pole of an elected office in a particular party. So for, let's say, you've got Idaho, which is where I live, right? You've got the Republican Party of Idaho, and there's a chairman and a vice chairman, and then you got the committee, and then each county has its committees, and each county is broken up by the precinct committeemen. Every precinct, every voting precinct has somebody that's supposed to represent the party. And it's those people who vote for who's going to run the chair in that county. And then those people then vote for who's going to be running the state. And that's how it all works. So the problem is that most people don't even know about these things. So you have a lot of empty seats, and then some of the seats, about half of the seats that are currently filled, are filled by people who really, we could consider them establishment Republicans, not really patriots. So here's what Dan Schultz's methodology is. Get patriots in the precinct committeeman seats. This is not hard. Now, in Idaho, and I don't know how it works in your state, but if you want to take back, and I'm going to guess that most of my audience, most people watching are patriots, people who are concerned about preserving, protecting, defending the Constitution of the United States, and truly doing that, then I'm going to guess that you want to get involved in politics and you would like to take the Republican Party back away from the establishment Republicans. It's going to be easy to do if we fill these precinct committee seats. It's going to be as simple as that, because a good friend of mine lives 5 doors down. He ran for precinct committeeman in our precinct. He's a friend of mine, and he won. He got 2/3 of the vote. And so now he's our elected precinct committeeman. They meet once a month. I think there's 3 months during the year they don't meet. And one day he was over. We're sitting in the front room, we're talking, and he's talking about how every precinct committeeman can have an alternate. And my wife, who is a genius when it comes to constitutional government, she's sitting there, and I said, there's your alternate right there. And he looked at her and he said, would you like to be my alternate? She said, sure. So he took her name and went down, and next committee meeting submitted her name to be his alternate, and she got approved. What does that mean? Well, when he's not in these monthly meetings, then she gets to attend, and she can even attend anytime she wants. She just can't vote. But she's going to have the ability to give input into what the county decides, and then the county has input into what the state decides. And so when you have right now 400,000 precinct committeemen in the nation for the Republican Party, think about that, 400,000. About 100,000 of them are occupied by, shall we say, establishment Republicans. About 100,000 of them are occupied by patriots, people who might fall into the Tea Party mindset of pure constitutional government. And about 200,000 precinct committeeman seats sit vacant. And that is why the Republican National Committee, run by establishment Republicans, doesn't want you to know about those 200,000 empty seats. Because if you are a patriot and you want to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, and you run for those precinct committeeman seats, and you then have the majority over the establishment, well, then you guys, us, the patriots, are deciding how it all comes together, how our government works, what gets decided. And we have to be able to vet the people. So this is people just waking up, I think, just realizing all politics is local. So we have to be thinking local, precinct. Precincts are not large. Get to know people, get to influence people. And here's a whole series, links to in this article, of videos that you can watch on how to run for office and how to be a good precinct committeeman to get people involved. This guy talks about how he spent a couple hours a month just connecting with people in his precinct. And then as the election draws near, he spent a couple hours on election day and the days before, a couple hours each day doing it. And they would always watch their time. They didn't want to go overboard on their time. But they got like 87% Republican turnout to vote overwhelmingly. And they got a Republican just by spending a couple hours a week doing this. So the question is, how do you do this? Great question. Glad you asked. Go to uncoverdc.com and read the article by Wendy Strock Mahoney called What the RNC Doesn't Want You to Know. And it tells you what a precinct committeeman does. It says a precinct committeeman is an elected or appointed party official, because if there's an opening, you can actually apply to be appointed. So get this. You can just go down and say, hey, I'm interested, and I'm open to being the if there's an opening, then you can get in. Just say, hey, I'd like to be one. How do you find out? Great question. I was having this conversation earlier this evening with somebody, and they said, how do I find out who my precinct committeemen are, and how do I find out what seats are open? Well, I just went to, I live in Ada County, Idaho. It was a very simple internet search. I said, who are the precinct committeemen in Ada County? And I think the third or fourth link there on the Google said, here's Ada County Republicans. So I clicked on that, and I was specifically looking for precinct committeemen. And it said, if you want to know, have any questions, email this person. So I sent her an email. I said, how do I find out who the precinct committeemen are in my county? And within an hour, I had a response with a link to find out who the precinct committeemen were and what openings were available. Now, every county is going to be different. Mine just happened to be very responsive. But you can find out. It's just doing a little bit of investigative journalism, thinking for how do I find that out and who do I need to email, and taking the initiative. And like I said, ours meets once a month. In Idaho, precinct committeemen throughout the state meet once a month. And they discuss what's going to be on the agenda. What kind of stand are we going to take as a party? So you can do this too. A precinct committeeman represents the party and is the voter's personal contact, creating accessibility and an essential visibility between the voters, candidates, and elected officials. Precinct committeemen interact with elected party officials and can influence legislation. So interesting, and this is interesting. I kind of flew through this earlier. A voter cannot change party leadership. So the person who's in charge of the party in your state, but the precinct committeeman can change who that is. It's called for a vote. A voter has no control over the type of candidates the party puts up, but the precinct committeemen do. They sit around and talk about that. Who are we going to put up? A voter doesn't get to elect party leadership. A precinct committeeman does. You have a vote in that. You can change party leaders. So here's the sitch. My wife can go to a meeting and she can vote. If the precinct committeeman is there, not there, she can vote. She can have an input. And then you get some neighbors involved, and you get some of your other conservative patriots involved. And you say, hey, let's go do this. And you start taking over the party and get patriotism back in place. So situation was down in Arizona. Let me scroll down to this part of the article here. So Kelly Ward down in Arizona, she was elected as the GOP chairwoman for Arizona. And comment was that she's been hugely influential in the push for election integrity. And so Dan Schultz says she could have been entirely more effective if the state party and its precincts had patriots in them. 2/3 vacancy in Arizona. 2/3 of the Republicans, 2/3 of the precinct committeemen from the Republican side are empty. And if they had been filled with constitutional conservatives, there could have been a whole lot more election integrity, so to speak. So, anyways, I want to encourage you to get involved. To listen to this from Schultz, by the way, before I close this one out. If 0.3%, which would be 200,000 people, 0.3% of Trump voters had filled the empty seats, they could have taken over the party. Would have guaranteed better people getting elected in 2022 primaries and general election. It will do that. And by 2024, we could actually reclaim the House and the Senate and the presidency, because the votes would then be counted properly. Here in Idaho, we've got some pretty active conservatives who put together a citizens committee, and they came up with a proclamation, I think 10 points or so, on how to create election integrity. Imagine one of their suggestions is fantastic. They met down in the Lincoln Room at our Idaho State House, which is a nice big conference room, big presentation room, committee room. And they had this, you could get up, the public would get up and talk about it, and they came up with a resolution on how we can create more election integrity. Listen to this one, just one suggestion out of their 10. Count the number of ballots at the beginning of the day. And throughout the day, you're going to have cast ballots, and you're going to have spoiled ballots, people who ruin their ballots and have to turn them back in and get a fresh ballot. And then you're going to have unused ballots. So cast ballots, spoiled ballots, and unused ballots. So you count them at the beginning of the day, and you count them at the end of the day, and they got a match. I love that. How simple is this, right? It sure would preclude vans showing up at midnight or 3 o'clock in the morning full of ballots. I mean, you don't have 100,000 ballots at the start and 200,000 ballots at the end. You would be able to count right from the start. Here's how many ballots we have. That's it. Anyways, let me take a little break and show you this really cool thing here. This is our new coffee mug. This is the new Book of Daniel coffee mug. A friend of mine does t-shirts, and he's a great artist. And we were talking, and he opened up a Teespring store where you can upload designs, and they'll print them on t-shirts. And you can order them, and he makes a couple bucks. And so I decided I'm going to do the same thing for New Book of Daniel, the New Book of Daniel brand. So there's t-shirts and coffee mugs, and you can get them in different colors. I just happen to think the brown goes with the yellow New Book of Daniel. And then it's got my little pencil sketch of me, the New Book of Daniel logo. And one of my favorite sayings that I teach my clients, some of you may or may not know, I've been an executive coach for 30 years. And one of my Danielisms that I teach is first you're born, then you have choices. Because it's not true about taxes, right? You don't have to pay taxes. There's consequences to not paying taxes, but you don't have to pay them. So first you're born, then you have choices. You simply choose to pay the taxes to avoid the negative consequence. It's about personal responsibility. Anyways, I made one of those up. So you can get that in a t-shirt or a coffee mug. First you're born, then you have choices. And then on the coffee mug, I went ahead and added the words choose coffee. So, there is your, and I will put a link down below when this thing publishes. So if you want to order your own New Book of Daniel coffee mug, you'll be able to do that, or New Book of Daniel t-shirt for that matter. All right, so let's move on to my next topic, which is, and I just encourage you to go back to uncoverdc.com and take a look at that article from Wendy Strauch-Mahoney about what the RNC doesn't want you to know. And it's some really cool video links in there, by the way, on how to do all these things. So we can do it. Topic number 2 on the podcast is Mr. Bill Gates advocating that all wealthy nations switch to eating synthetic beef. I hardly have any words for this. Only because I remember watching a video probably about 2 years ago where Bill Gates was being interviewed, and he said that he was being questioned about something with investments, and he says, "No, I've invested heavily in synthetic beef." And so when I saw this article today, I went back and looked up some of the. I can't find the video. I'm going to look for it. But I did find a couple of articles that are a couple of years old where Bill Gates invested heavily in synthetic beef. So here he is now proclaiming to the rest of the world that we should all switch to synthetic beef. Didn't announce any conflict of interest. Didn't say, oh, by the way, I'm invested in these companies. I'm the spokesman for the synthetic beef industry. I just thought it was kind of unethical for him to do that. He does have a conflict of interest. Personally, you won't catch me eating any synthetic beef. Sorry. Story number 3. Interesting news out of Afghanistan. Some good news and some bad news. The bad news is 30 people died in an explosion. The good news is they were Taliban terrorists. They were at a mosque. They were attending a class on how to make bombs. These were expert mine makers, and they were learning to create bigger and better IEDs, improvised explosive devices. And they blew up the mosque, and 30 of them died. So sorry that 30 guys died. Good news is we now have 30 fewer IED people creating IEDs to kill innocent people. So good news and bad news out of Afghanistan. Story number 4. Republicans in Louisiana, however you pronounce it these days, depends on where you're from. They are demanding an immediate resignation for Senator Bill Cassidy. This is the guy I talked about a few podcasts ago who, when they put out the first vote, when Rand Paul said, hey, this is an unconstitutional impeachment, and there was a vote on that, is this even constitutional? Bill Cassidy voted that no, it was not constitutional. But then there was another one because the House managers came forward and presented their case, trying to convince them that this was a constitutional effort. And the defense attorneys for Trump got up, and I guess they didn't do such a great job. And Bill Cassidy switched his vote and said, yes, this is constitutional, and let's keep going with this. And I was kind of incredulous because either it's constitutional or it's not. Either you know your Constitution or you don't. So it's kind of funny. My wife and I, my wife teaches it. We put together a Constitution class here in Idaho, over in just the next town over in Meridian, every other Saturday night. And we got about 50 people that show up. And my wife is amazed at how many people do not understand the Constitution. And I have talked with people who have been elected officials, and they tell me, gosh, I should go to that class. And it's like, okay, you're an elected official and you don't read the Constitution? I mean, this is a book that I keep in my pocket. I mean, you can have one. Just let me know and I'll send you one. Or you can go online and, probably pull it down for free somewhere. But this Constitution has got a bunch of interesting things. And when you read it, you get to learning what the government should and should not be doing. And you realize, sadly, just how much of an unconstitutional government we currently have. But it helps you to become aware of what's going on. So here's Mr. Bill Cassidy in Louisiana, senator, who apparently does not know the Constitution, and voted actually to convict Trump for inciting an insurrection. Voters in Louisiana are not happy. Trump won Louisiana by almost 60% of the vote. No small margin there. It says here, Cassidy's, and this is the thing that I think is the dig, Cassidy's re-election campaign commercials, because he was, running for office, emphasized his endorsement by President Trump. So here the guy was endorsed by President Trump. He's running campaign ads saying, I'm endorsed by President Trump. And Trump wins re-election, and immediately Cassidy starts criticizing Trump for challenging the election results, which I think there was significant evidence for Trump to challenge. And we can continue that conversation in lots of different places. He then joins the Democrats to vote to convict Trump. I don't think the president called for violence. He asked his supporters to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. It was a kangaroo court trial. It was an embarrassment to the country. I had posted something online, and somebody from Europe said, we're laughing. No, we're not laughing at you. We're sad. because the way that the United States goes, the rest of the world goes that way. So we'll see what happens with this. I'm going to follow this story. Pennsylvania County GOP had actually censored Senator Pat Toomey for his impeachment vote. This goes back to the fact that we need to fill those precinct committeeman seats in our local districts and get involved. So, all right, let's move on to my next story, which is a couple of stores in Seattle that are closing, grocery stores, because the Seattle city government has decided that all these grocery workers that have worked through the pandemic need hazard pay. $4 an hour instant increase in pay, hazard pay, that the city government is mandating that these companies pay their employees. Because some of these stores were allowed to be open during the pandemic when smaller stores weren't. I think like Walmart made an extra $1.7 billion over and above what was expected. And what they've done with a lot of the money is they've given stock up, they've bought back stocks, they've given bonuses to executives and things like that. So yeah, maybe they should be paying their folks more. I mean, you think about it. You're dealing with people coming in your store. Personally, I think it's no big deal. I think on a personal level, I think the whole thing was overblown. But here we have a city government mandating that a private company increase its pay to employees. Same thing happened in Southern California. Same thing happened down there. I guess there's a suburb of Seattle that's saying $5 an hour. And so this Quality Food Centers store in Seattle, they're closing 2 of their locations. It says, and so the stores are saying grocery stores would have to raise their prices for consumers to cover the cost of hazard pay for employees. Arguable. They made a lot of profit. But I think when you look up the definition of the word socialism, you see that it's when the government decides what the pay is going to be. And that's not exactly how I want to be living. By the way, quick aside, COVID vaccines, lots of money. I have an article that just came out today over at Uncover DC. This is not in my list of topics, but I'm going to throw it in. Go read that article at Uncover DC on the Follow the Money on hydroxychloroquine versus the vaccines. And the reason I bring that up is because Safeway, Albertsons, these grocery stores are going to start being a vaccine administration location. So grocery stores are going to start, you can, one-stop shop, right? Go in and get your carrots and a shot in the arm while you're at it. Of an MRA, some experimental injection. They call it a vaccine. I'm going to put quotations around that. Go read my article at uncoverdc.com. Follow the money, hydroxychloroquine versus vaccine. I cite some of the interview that I held with Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, who came up with the Zelenko protocol using hydroxychloroquine to reduce hospital admissions by 84%. That's huge. And yet it got smeared and they pushed the vaccine, and now we have vaccine deaths. There's over 270 deaths that have been reported to the Vaccine Injury Court, and nearly 10,000 adverse events. That's what they call them, adverse events, to the Vaccine Injury Court. And in my article, I challenge people. I said, you tell me how many people have died or have had adverse effects from taking hydroxychloroquine in accordance with the Zelenko protocol. So far, it's been crickets. There's nothing out there on it. Nobody's died. People have died from COVID when they were administered HCQ too late in the program. But when people are administered HCQ in accordance with the Zelenko protocol, no adverse effects, no deaths. This despite Neil Cavuto sticking his finger in our face yelling at us saying, you will literally die from this. You will die from this. No, Neil, you won't. He didn't check your facts. All right. So one more sip of my coffee, by the way, if you're checking in late, you need to pick up one of these new Book of Daniel mugs, coffee mugs. I'll put the link in the show notes down below. First you're born, then you have coffee. All right. So next topic has to do with Idaho. This is, I think there's some not so ethical stuff going on at the State House. It just looks this way. We've got Representative Ben Adams. This guy's a former Marine. He's a state rep here in Idaho. He introduced a bill called Defend the Guard. And he took it to the House Transportation and Defense Committee, which is chaired by one Joe Palmer, Representative Joe Palmer, from Meridian, Idaho. And he got up and talked about this bill. Now, how bills work in Idaho is when you bring up an idea, if you're a representative and you want to present some legislation for consideration, it's called a routing slip. It's called an RS. And you request permission to stand in front of a committee and present your RS. And then the committee votes on whether or not they want to consider it. And if it's worthy legislation to be considered for a bill, and then once it's voted yes in that, then it becomes a bill, and it gets a bill number, and then it's debated in the committee, and they decide, how can we improve the wording on this? This is worthwhile legislation. How can we improve the wording? And then it goes, once they have voted out of committee, then it goes to the House floor, and then they have to read the bill 3 times and talk about it, and they can have floor debate, and then they vote on the bill. And that's how the process works. So Representative Ben Adams from Nampa, Idaho presents, he's an ex-Marine, he presents this Defend the Guard bill that would prohibit the National Guard from Idaho from being deployed to overseas wars that are not declared by Congress. Our Constitution says that Congress is who gets to declare a war. The president doesn't get to declare a war. That's not in Article 2 of the Constitution. The legislative branch gets to declare war. So he says, unless we have a prescribed declaration of war by the U.S. Congress, then our brothers and sisters and daughters and sons who are serving in the Idaho National Guard cannot be deployed to overseas combat. So Chairman Joe Palmer says, all in favor of this RS becoming a bill, vote yes. Signify by saying yes. 10 people of his committee said yes. All opposed say no. 5 people said no. There's 15 people on the Transportation Defense Committee. Joe Palmer, but this is a voice vote. Joe Palmer says, measures failed, and he slams his gavel. And one of the representatives requests a roll call vote because clearly 10 people said yes and 5 people said no. And the chair said, the vote failed. Because I want a roll call vote. In other words, read each name on the committee and each person casts their vote and it's recorded. Palmer refused. He said, the vote's decided. Meeting adjourned. Slammed his gavel, got up and left. I'm incredulous at this. This is amazing. Clear violation of Robert's rules, clear violation of the will of the people on that committee, or our elected representatives on that committee. And this happened on Friday this past week. Today, now we're looking at Wednesday. And I have to tell you, a lot of people are upset about this. And I haven't followed the news to see what happened on this particular issue. But I do believe that Joe Palmer needs to be taken out of that chair role. And I'm wondering why he would be so adamant to not let that be heard in committee. Someone above him is applying pressure, in my opinion. So with that, all right. Yes, Palmer from Meridian, Idaho, is our chair of that committee, the Transportation and Defense Committee, who slammed the gavel and would not take a roll call vote on that routing slip. All right, let me wrap up my broadcast tonight and with some sad news. If you've been following my material for any length of time, you know that I am a Christian, and I've been a Christian for well over 30 years. And when I became a Christian, I was introduced to Christian music. And one of my friends, really turned me on to some wide variety of Christian music. And one of those artists was a guy by the name of Carman. And his full name is Carman Dominique Liccardello, Italian guy. Very unique songwriting approach, and very much popular with teens, and a great songwriter. And Carmen's had cancer for a long time, going on a number of years now, but he made a comeback. And he, in fact, my wife and my daughter and I went and saw him a couple years ago, and saw him perform. I've seen him now perform several times. In fact, when I was writing a Christian newspaper column for a newspaper in Southern California, and we got tickets to go to the concert, and being a music columnist, Christian music columnist for the Christian newspaper, I got to interview Carman, had a half an hour interview with him after his concert. Very, very spiritual man, brought a lot of people to a saving faith in the Lord Jesus, was very, very effective in what he did. And he was made his comeback, did some concerts, and he's been in and out of cancer, had brain cancer. But of all things, he had a hernia. He had a hiatal hernia, and he was having surgery in Las Vegas yesterday, Tuesday. And he passed away in Las Vegas, fighting a series of complications resulting from the surgery to that hernia. So Mr. Carman is now visiting with all of the people that have gone on before him when he was telling them about how to get eternal life. And, we are saddened on this planet to lose such a gifted musician and to lose such a gifted evangelist who did so much great work for the kingdom of God. And if you've never heard his music, he's a storyteller in song, and he was funny, and he was witty, and he just kept going. Even after the cancer, he just kept going. So, like I said, he is now rejoicing with a lot of those people. And I'm sure there's probably hundreds of thousands of people who are introducing themselves to him that he never even met, that probably came to know saving faith through his music, through his ministry, that he would never have met. And so that would be kind of like one of my hopes. There's a great song by a cappella group called For Him, as I want to be the kind of man that you would write about. And I just hope that at some point in time, when I have the same kind of entrance into the pearly gates, that there are people who walk up to me and go, Daniel, I read your stuff. I listened to you teaching on the things, and I made a decision for Jesus, and I'm here because of that. So if you do not have salvation through the blood of Jesus Christ, it's just a faith thing. It is a reasoned faith thing. It's not a blind faith thing. I do encourage people to look into that and establish a relationship and get to know, because like I said, it's a reasoned faith. It is not blind faith. The Bible is very clear about that. Even the Apostle Paul was very clear. Come, let us reason together. So with that, I will close out my podcast for today. Carman, I'm sure, is resting not just in peace, but in joy with all his newfound friends. And we will talk with you probably this weekend. I'm doing 2 of these live streams a week now. I might even bump it up to 3. You never know, but I'm having fun doing them. Hope you're enjoying them too. You can follow my writings at uncoverdc.com. You can follow me on over at the new book of Daniel blog, which is newbookofdaniel.com, www.newbookofdaniel.com. And I've not been writing there much. I've been working on several books, several of them. If you're watching on YouTube and you want to subscribe to the channel, go ahead and click that red subscribe button. And then if you want to get notified when I do live streaming like this, or if I do upload a recorded video, you can click that little bell, and that bell will send you notifications that, hey, Daniel's going live. And that'll help out some things there too. And by the way, I'm also I'm moving over to CloutHub. Since I got booted off of Twitter, and who knows how long YouTube's going to let me do these things live, I'm going to be moving and morphing slowly over to CloutHub, getting a channel over there and a group and whatnot. We'll have some fun, try to reconcile. You can also follow me on Gab. I'm over at Gab. Look for New Book of Daniel. I'm on MeWe, New Book of Daniel. And, of course, Facebook, still, New Book of Daniel. So I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And until the next time we talk, I pray that you are all blessed, staying warm in these crazy streams of winter that decided to kick us in the last minute. Stay warm. Be blessed. Catch you next time.